Today in sports, it was announced that a fan streaking at a BC Lions game on June 16th, who was taken out by BC Lions player Marcel Young, is seeking legal counsel for injuries incurred from the hit. Should this case be thrown out of court in the case of a streaking fan like this? Or does the player, league, and team have some responsibility to take care of a fan in this matter? I'm going to analyze this from a rational perspective, from the various sides, and see if we can't come to a conclusion. Stay tuned.
Time to do the job. Time to do the job! Behold the jobber of jobbers. Danimal Jobber.
What's up, everybody? This is the Edmonton Area Zone D-Job, Danimal Daniel Jobber, with a Jobbing Out with Danimal Daniel Jobber social commentary. So yeah, this case just hit the news for me today. Been announced on TSN and various other medias that this unnamed streaker is seeking legal counsel for what happened on June 16th. He streaked onto the field, which is obviously mischief, it's trespassing. I would never in any way condone streaking. It's immature. It's not exactly any smart reason to do something like that. It puts yourself at risk of harm, players at risk of harm, authorized personnel at risk of harm. I mean, bad things can happen when people behave in unexpected ways. And he should have known that doing this was risky and not a smart decision on his part. So he can't be not held accountable for his actions. He took risks, and when you take risks, sometimes you get burned and things can happen. On the other hand, when he was on the field, Marcel Young, BC Lion player, clad in full uniform, a professional athlete, took him out, drove his body into him, knocking him to the ground. Certainly harder than it needed to be to put him on the ground, to subdue him. And apparently, according to this fan, he sought legal counsel because he suffered serious injuries, including what the lawyer reports as mild traumatic brain trauma as a result of this hit. Should the player in the league, or the player, the team, and the league have some accountability for this, if it did in fact cause injury to this fan? That's what we want to look at today from a rational perspective, analyzing both sides. Because I don't think it's as cut and dried as any, and people are going to take sides one way or another. I don't think it's as cut and dried, either way. And I want to analyze what should happen in this case. What should be the overall result of this? So I don't recall ever hearing a case like this before. As far as I'm aware, this is unprecedented, that a streaking fan was injured by an athlete and suffered serious enough injury to consult a lawyer to pursue legal action, or presumably to pursue legal action because of what happened. And if it is a precedent, this is a very important case, that the results of this case will have ripple impact throughout the world of sports. And of course, me being a big fan of professional wrestling, of course, there's a huge impact there, because sometimes fans do get into the show and get involved in areas that they shouldn't, and put themselves and the athletes at risk. And sometimes various types of force is used to deal with that fan. But in football particularly, of course, because they're also wearing uniforms and are protective equipment, and the fan was unarmed and certainly did not have such protective equipment, it's an even bigger issue. And really, there's certainly no reason for a fan to believe that he's going to be made an example of. That's the best way to put it. Made an example of in this case, to warn other fans and to be a warning to other fans as what can happen if you do things that are not appropriate at a sporting event. Can people not be accountable, or athletes not be accountable for making an example of somebody if doing so causes unnecessary harm to them and is as a result of unnecessary force? being used. And so I don't think you can totally let the organization off the hook either. I think Marcel Young and BC Lions organization and the league does have to take this incident seriously and really analyze, what's happened and take some form of action, especially if this fan is injured, especially with brain trauma in this day and age where brain injury is so heavily talked about and recognized as something that can have long-lasting or lifelong negative impacts on a person's ability to function at 100%. There is still some accountability, and especially I don't hold professional athletes who are trained and built to basically physically overpower and dominate other athletes. There is I believe there's some responsibility to that, to use that ability and that athletic ability only where it's appropriate to do so, and to not use it to put other people who are not in such an athletic competition at harm. You have to temper your ability. You know your own strength, as we always put it. You need to know your own strength if you're in a position like a professional wrestler or a football athlete clad in basically what's almost armor in some ways. Yeah, some onus on them to use their physical abilities appropriately and responsibly. And in this case, yes, the fan was a nuisance. He was a danger. He's accountable for his actions. He took risks that were unnecessary, and he suffered some consequences because of it. But should this fan have expected that he would be made an example of, and that physical force that was not necessary in this case, because it didn't appear, at least to me, and I'm presumably most people, that this fan was in any way attempting to harm or injure any other person in his actions. It didn't. I'm sure it didn't occur to him that he would be physically have more than necessary physical force applied to him, and that he would be made an example of. So, was this situation warranted? And I don't think it was. I think Marcel Young overstepped his boundaries. He's not a paid security personnel. He's not responsible or authorized in any way to protect the game or the players, the fans, or anyway from people acting in unauthorized ways. And therefore, his actions were his own conscious decision to do what he did, and he had also the ability to exercise self-control in his actions as well. So I don't think you can hold him not somewhat accountable for any damage he may have caused to this fan's well-being, especially if there is long-term implications to his life. Maybe if he's going to be off work, if he's unable to make a full income, or if there's damages that will limit his ability to earn an honest income for the rest of his life. This force that was applied to him didn't need to be what it was. All security people will generally do is do what is necessary, and same with authorized law personnel, do what is necessary to get the perpetrator to the ground in a position where he is unable to cause any more harm. And certainly a physical hit of that nature, that basically what we would call a pop in football, is not necessary to achieve this goal, especially when the league doesn't allow this to a necessary force to be done even to athletes in certain cases. There's clean hits and there's not clean hits, especially, and of course anything that puts a person's head at risk is always seriously talked about. So I think there is some accountability to Marcel Young, to the BC Lions. And I mean, the fans, regardless, were cheering. Several of his teammates were also, congratulating him on his actions. And of course, the league also is in the limelight over the situation. And there's some embarrassment and some negative social publicity from this incident. And therefore, I think everybody needs to take some action, some accountability. Now, should this case go to court? I don't think that's a good idea for anybody. For example, the streaker, he took took a risk to himself by trespassing, going on the field without proper authorization, and there is some risk that he could get hurt or cause injury to somebody else, and that he would be liable to his actions he caused. And therefore, any judge is going to have to look at the situation and say, he had some onus in what happened to him. At the same time, the player Marcel Young didn't need to exercise as much force or any force. He could have allowed authorized security personnel to do their job and not attempt to make an example of this fan. So he had a choice too to act differently, and he made a conscious choice to deliver the unnecessary force that may have injured this fan, and so he has some onus too. And because, of course, the team employs him and the league authorizes the team to do business, I think they all have some accountability. So at the same time, they need to think about their side as well. In my opinion, I think this going to court, one, would be negative publicity for the streaker, because what he's done is embarrassing. It's going to be viewed by employers, future employers, people that will make decisions, regarding his future. I don't think he wants any more unnecessary publicity over this. In the long run, it's a bad thing. Plus, as I said, the judge is probably going to take into account his side of things, that he shouldn't have been doing what he was doing to begin with. He was essentially breaking the law. So in my opinion, if I was a judge, I certainly wouldn't award him any more damages than was reasonable to take care of him and get him back to presumable health and normal functioning. I certainly wouldn't award him extra damages or trauma earnings or whatever you want to call it, because of the fact that he took a risk he should never have taken to begin with. At the same time, the league may not want this publicity, the team may not want this publicity, and so they might actually want to attempt to put together a settlement to take care of this fan, maybe even outside of court, because incurring legal fees and negative publicity over this case in court doesn't really help them at all in the long run anyways, and it's going to be a precedent. It's going to be an example for future court cases if this ever happens again as well. And I think the less publicity that the league, especially a smaller league like the CFL and a small league team like the BC Lions, probably could use less than more negative publicity in this matter. So I really think this case should be settled out of court, that they should make a decision or make an agreement of how much money it's going to take care of this fan and pay it willingly, and maybe they give some fines to the BC Lions, and the BC Lions and the league may fine Marcel Young for just taking unnecessary actions in this case. To basically set it to show to the fans and in the sports world that they do take this incident seriously, and that they recognize that using excessive force to make an example of a misbehaving fan is not an appropriate way to deal with a situation either, any more than the fan's decision to go on the field like this was appropriate. And certainly like I said, the fan himself doesn't want the negative publicity, and he's probably, if I was a judge, I wouldn't award him any more money than is necessary. So he's probably not going to make out better if he does go to court with it, especially considering the legal costs he's going to incur not taking a deal beforehand. So I think he'd be better off take a deal as well. So I think this case should be settled before it ever hits the court with enough money to take care of the fan, and it should we should move on from that, and the case should kind of fade out of the limelight, because I don't think it's a case that deserves a long fight and a lot of media attention and a huge decision that will impact future such occurrences in the sports world if it should ever happen again. Now, I guess the final question regarding the fan. Reportedly, they did later on ban him for a year from BC Place Stadium. Theoretically, they could ban him for more and make an example of the situation on a different level. But in this case, they probably shouldn't do it with this particular fan, because the fan is pursuing legal action. To take action beyond what you would do with any other fan in that same situation who was streaking would be almost would be perceived as retaliatory in some cases, and so probably they should leave it as it is. However, they may choose, and other organizations may choose, to set a more severe penalty for fans who put themselves, players, and authorized personnel at risk with such actions, whether it be in football or any other sport or professional wrestling or whatever. That there should be a more severe a more severe punishment. But then they need to announce it and make sure it's clear that the consequences of such actions are what they're going to be, and so that if the situation happens again, the fan or the perpetrator has clear knowledge of what the consequences are. Because I don't know if everybody fully realizes, what can happen to a person who streaks or who gets involved in a way that puts themselves and others at harm at a sporting event. I don't know if they know all the things that can actually be done by the the team in retaliation, legal action towards them. So certainly there may be an example of why we need to make these punishments and consequences clear, and that might be a better deterrent than anything. Certainly better than unnecessary force and risking injury to a fan that is, bad for every way around, bad for publicity, bad for the fan. Just make a clear set of consequences to such behavior, so that fans know in any sport event they go to, you do this, this is what's going to happen. And then enforce that every single time, so that fans are no better than to take these risks. I think if more fans fully realized all the things that can happen, I think less of them would take the risk. I mean, some of them may be, consume excessive amounts of alcohol and get lost in the moment and may still do stupid things. I mean, people do stupid things all the time. But if the consequences are clear and publicized, maybe less of them would, or more of them would think twice, use their restraining bolt to make a better decision. So I think this is probably a better way to proceed than to do any additional retaliation towards the fan. And like I said, I think the league and the team and the player should settle this matter out of court with an undisclosed amount of money to cover the fan's expenses, to get back to health, or whatever is required to take care of him in the situation that he was put in by the excessive force caused by Marcel Young. And the league and the team should announce a fine of an undisclosed amount of money to Marcel Young to unfortunately let players know that they're not free to do whatever they want to a misbehaving fan, that they have a responsibility to use their physical prowess, the physical equipment that they're wearing responsibly, and not use it to put anybody at risk, whether they're breaking the law or just an innocent bystander. They still should have a responsibility to behave responsibly in public, especially being, an example of I'm going to say a physical specimen, but a person who is expected to have more physical prowess than the average person. So anyways, that's what I think of this case. If it does go to court, I think it's going to be a necessary legal cost, a necessary embarrassment and publicity to both the fan and the player, Marcel Young, the league, and the team, the BC Lions. And I don't think any more and better is going to come of it than if it was settled out of court. So I think this matter should just be settled, take care of the fan, move forward, and make an example of everybody in this case, because unfortunately it could happen again. And everybody needs to know their rights and responsibilities in these matters, because I don't think it's clear what can happen when a person misbehaves at a sporting event, and two, when a professional athlete with abilities, physical prowess, uses that to make an example of, or dish out unnecessary punishment to especially without authorization of security personnel to this misbehaving person. So yeah, I think it's a great example. Lots we can learn from this, and well, I'm not going to say I'm glad it happened, but in the same way, I think something like this had to happen to bring this issue to light as something that could happen, and it could have been a lot worse. Maybe the player was having a horrible time of things and was really frustrated, and all of a sudden took out a ridiculous amount of frustration on this fan, and he was seriously injured or killed. I mean, you just never know what can happen when a less physically equipped person is impacted by a much more physically adept person. Anything can happen, and maybe it's good that in this case it was mild brain trauma and nothing worse. So yeah, we need to learn from it, move forward, and make an example of this in the world of sports going forward, so that nothing like this or much worse ever happens again. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you think. You can follow me on Twitter at badplayer03 or at Daniel Jobber, capital D, capital J. You can also follow me on Instagram at Danimal Daniel Jobber, all lowercase letters. I take email at danimaldanielJobber@gmail.com. Of course, I'm on YouTube under various channels, including my new channel, the Wannabe Actor, that I'm working on. And I'd just like to know what you think. What are your thoughts on this crazy matter that has come into the world of sports just out of the blue so early in the CFL season? Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up with that. Once again, this has been a Jobbing Out with Danimal Daniel Jobber social commentary. Thanks for listening. Thanks for checking me out either on YouTube or Podbean. And I will talk to you in the future. Jobber out.
Time to do the job. Time to do the job! Behold the jobber of jobbers. Danimal Jobber.